Welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into some fascinating thoughts from Swami Krishnananda about the relationship between the secular and the spiritual.
That sounds really interesting.
We'll be looking at a transcript from a retreat talk he gave back in 1996.
Okay, so this is kind of like a snapshot of his thinking at that time.
Right. And he starts off by, kind of jumping right into this historical example of this power struggle between King Henry VIII and the Pope.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And he uses this to kind of illustrate this long-standing divide we've created between like the worldly and the sacred.
That's a pretty classic example for sure. I mean, it kind of sets the stage for this whole idea of a separation between church and state.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is that Krishnananda argues that this whole separation is actually based on wrong thinking.
So he's not buying into this idea of two totally separate realms.
No, not at all. He emphasizes that humans are integrated wholes. Like we're not these divided beings.
Right. So then what does he say about those things that we usually categorize as purely secular?
Well, he actually questions whether anything can truly be classified as purely secular.
Interesting. So where do we go from there?
Well, this leads into his concept of interconnectedness. He argues that we are all part of human society, part of nature.
So inherently part of this so-called secular world.
Exactly.
But then how does that fit with spiritual seeking?
He suggests that this connection is not at odds with spiritual seeking at all.
Okay. So it's not this either situation.
No, not at all.
That makes sense.
In fact, he believes it's essential to it. But he does critique something he calls baby mind thinking, which he believes can lead to dissatisfaction and a sense of, spiritual emptiness.
Oh, interesting. Baby mind thinking. What's that all about?
Well, he says it's basically this limited way of seeing things that keeps us from seeing the bigger picture.
I see. So it's like we're stuck in this kind of narrow perspective.
Yeah. And he argues that, seeing God as above us, society is outside us, and nature is this external thing, creates a very fragmented view of reality. And this fragmentation, he says, is actually the root of a lot of our unease.
I can see how that would be. I mean, if we're constantly separating ourselves from everything around us, it's bound to create a sense of disharmony.
Right, exactly. So it's not really about rejecting the world or, trying to escape from it.
It's more about understanding our place in it.
And recognizing that we're all interconnected.
Yeah, that's a pretty profound idea. So how does this connect to spiritual practice?
Well, this leads us to Swami Krishnananda's concept of karma yoga.
Karma yoga, I've heard that term before, but...
It's this idea that true spiritual activity is actually not separate from our everyday lives.
Okay, so it's not like we have to go off to a monastery or something to be spiritual.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He describes it more as an emanation of being, kind of like how the sun, just by existing, gives life.
Oh, I see. So it's about our very way of being in the world.
Exactly.
But he does make a distinction, right, between ordinary action, which binds us, and divine action, which doesn't.
Right. And this raises the question, like, what does that divine action actually look like?
Yeah, how do we even know if we're acting in a way that's aligned with our true nature?
Right.
It's like we need some kind of compass or something to guide us.
And this is where I think Krishnananda's ideas about seeing the world correctly become really important.
Right, so it's not just about experiencing God, but about perceiving the world in a way that dissolves the artificial boundaries we've created.
Exactly. It's about seeing through those limitations of baby mind thinking.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does he talk about achieving this kind of clear vision?
Well, he talks about this state of profound communion called samadhi.
Samadhi, like a state of deep meditation.
Yeah, it's where the distinction between the subject and object kind of dissolves.
Yeah.
Wow.
That sounds pretty intense.
He actually uses this really vivid image of molten steel entering one's being to describe it.
Molten steel. Wow. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, it definitely sounds transformative. And, here's where his message starts to feel really personal. He's saying that the divine isn't distant or separate.
So it's not something we have to search for somewhere out there.
No, he's saying that true spiritual understanding actually creates a temple around us.
Wow. So we're carrying that sacred space within us wherever we go.
Yeah, and this allows us to experience the sacred in everyday life, in everything we do. And he actually reinforces this point by referencing a story from the Mahabharata.
Oh, the Mahabharata.
Yeah, it's the scene where Krishna reveals his cosmic form.
Right. And that shows that the entire universe is present within him.
Yeah, exactly. And so it highlights this idea that the divine is present in all things, even the seemingly mundane.
So it's not about escaping the world, but about seeing the world differently.
Right. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything.
I think that's a really powerful message.
Me too. And I think it's something that we can all really benefit from contemplating, in our own lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It makes you wonder how our lives would be different if we could truly see the world through that lens.
Right. How would it change our relationships?
Yeah.
How would it change our work?
And maybe even just how we move through the world on a daily basis.
Right, exactly. It's all very interconnected. And I think that's really what Swami Krishnananda is trying to get at here.
So it's not about rejecting the secular, but about recognizing its inherent sacredness.
Exactly. And I think that's a really profound insight.
I agree. It's a lot to think about. Yeah, it really is. It kind of makes you think about how much of our lives we spend just going through the motions,
Yeah, totally. And Krishnananda actually talks a lot about the nature of true spiritual understanding, Like, what does it really mean to grasp these concepts?
Okay, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
So he argues that it's not just an intellectual exercise.
Right, so it's not just about reading books or having these deep conversations.
No, he's saying it's more like this transformative experience.
Yeah.
It affects our whole being.
That makes sense. So how does he describe that kind of transformation?
Well, he uses this analogy. Okay?
Yeah.
He says it's like molten steel entering one's being.
Whoa, molten steel. That's intense.
Yeah, it's pretty vivid imagery.
I can see how that would be a pretty powerful way to describe a profound spiritual insight.
Yeah, it's not just like a change in belief or something. It's this fundamental shift in the way we perceive and experience reality.
That sounds really profound. So then how do we get there? How do we cultivate that kind of shift in perspective?
Well, he talks a lot about the importance of contemplation and solitude.
Okay, so like taking time to be quiet and reflect.
Yeah, basically, like stepping back from all the noise and distractions of the world. Turning our attention inward.
I can see how that would be important, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation.
Right. It's like we're so used to looking outside of ourselves for answers,
Yeah, totally. We're always searching for the next thing that's going to make us happy or give us that sense of fulfillment.
Exactly. But Krishnananda is saying that true fulfillment comes from within.
And that requires us to really get to know ourselves, right? Like to explore our inner depths.
And he reminds us that we've spent a lifetime accumulating all this knowledge and opinions,
Yeah, like we've built up all these layers of conditioning and beliefs.
Exactly. And so now it's time to go beyond that, to directly experience the truth that lies within.
That makes sense. So it's not about adding more information to our minds, but about cultivating a different way of seeing, a different way of being.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that this isn't some distant goal. It's not something we have to wait for or work towards for years and years.
So it's not like this enlightenment is only for the select few or something?
No, he's saying it's available to us right now.
That's a really empowering message.
It is. And he actually uses this really powerful phrase to convey that sense of immediacy. He says, eternity does not take many months.
Wow. Eternity does not take many months. That's beautiful.
It is, right? And it kind of blows apart this idea that spiritual enlightenment is something we have to strive for,
Yeah, it's not like this far-off destination that only a few people ever reach.
Exactly. He's suggesting that the true nature of our being is already whole and complete.
And that by dropping our limited perspectives, we can realize that wholeness in the present moment.
Right. And that aligns perfectly with his earlier point about interconnectedness. If we're fundamentally connected to everything, then the divine isn't something separate from us.
Yeah, it's not like this external force or being that we have to reach out to.
It's woven into the very fabric of our being.
Right, so it's already there within us, just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. And when we realize that, he argues, it can transform our experience of everything, like our work, our relationships.
Even the most mundane tasks can become infused with a sense of meaning and purpose.
Totally. But he also emphasizes that faith and confidence are really important on this journey. It's not just about understanding these concepts intellectually.
Yeah, like head knowledge isn't enough.
Right. We have to embody them, live them, trust in the truth of our interconnectedness.
Yeah, I can see how that would be essential. Because if we don't really believe it deep down, then it's not going to have much impact on our lives.
And so he encourages us to cultivate this sense of inner completeness, to recognize that this whole macrocosm,
the vastness of the universe.
yeah, it's actually reflected within our own microcosmic individuality.
So it's like this whole universe is contained within each and every one of us.
Exactly. And he concludes his talk with this incredibly powerful statement. He says, "The Son of Man will become the Son of God."
Wow. That's really beautiful. And I think it encapsulates his whole message.
Yeah, it really does. It suggests that through this process of awakening, we move from this limited egocentric sense of self to a realization of our true divine nature.
And that transformation is available to all of us, right?
Exactly. It's not just for the saints or the mystics. It's for anyone who's willing to do the inner work.
And to see the world through this lens of interconnectedness.
Right. And so it begs the question, if the secular and the spiritual are not truly separate.
How does that understanding transform our approach to life?
Yeah. How does it affect the way we work, the way we relate to others, the way we move through the world?
It's a lot to consider.
It is. But I think it's a really worthwhile exploration.
Yeah, a lot to consider. Like, it makes you wonder, how different could our lives really be if we could actually start seeing the world through this lens,
Right. If we could really grasp this idea of interconnectedness and live it.
Exactly. Because Krishnananda seems to be saying that this isn't just some abstract philosophical concept, it's a way of life.
Yeah, it's about actually integrating the spiritual into the fabric of our daily lives, like seeing every single experience,
As an opportunity for growth, for understanding, for realizing our true nature.
Exactly. And he reminds us constantly that the divine isn't something we have to search for. No, not at all. He's saying it's present in every breath, every interaction, the very fabric of our being.
So it's more about awakening to something that's already there.
Right. And that's what I find so empowering about his message. Like, he's not saying we're broken or incomplete or anything. He's reminding us that we have this incredible potential within us.
And that we can tap into that potential by shifting our perspective, by changing the way we see the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about the importance of contemplation and solitude in this process, like quieting the mind, stepping back from all the noise and distractions of the world.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and forget to just pause and be still for a while.
Right. And in those moments of stillness, that's when we can really start to connect with that inner wisdom that's always there.
It's like creating space for something deeper to emerge.
Exactly. And so he encourages us to cultivate this awareness, not just during meditation or whatever, but throughout our daily lives, like in our interactions with others, in our work, in moments of both joy and sorrow.
So it's not about compartmentalizing the spiritual. It's about weaving it into everything we do.
Right. And I think ultimately that's what leads to a truly fulfilling life. Like when we can see the sacred in the everyday, the divine and the mundane, it transforms everything.
It gives our lives a sense of meaning and purpose that goes beyond just achieving external goals or accumulating possessions.
Exactly. And I think that's the real takeaway here, Like Krishnananda's message is one of empowerment. He's reminding us that we're not just victims of circumstance, We're not just tossed about by the whims of fate.
We have a choice in how we perceive the world.
Right. And how we respond to challenges and how we live our lives. We have this incredible power to shape our own reality.
And that power comes from recognizing the divine spark within us and living in alignment with that truth.
Exactly. And so this deep dive has been a really fascinating exploration of Swami Krishnananda's ideas, His perspective on the interconnectedness of the secular and the spiritual is just so profound.
And it really challenges us to think about our own beliefs and consider a different way of seeing the world.
Right. Like maybe true fulfillment isn't about seeking something outside of ourselves, but about awakening to this divine presence that's already within us.
And all around us.
Exactly. So we hope this has inspired you to kind of delve deeper into these questions and cultivate your own practice of contemplation and reflection.
And to see the world and your place in it with a sense of wonder and appreciation.
Exactly. So thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it meaningful.